Hey guys, tonight we step into the sweltering stone heart of the Aztec Empire. A place where justice isn't just served cold, it's painted in vivid red and wrapped in fragrant marigold petals. You're standing in the middle of Tenochtitlan, the empire's radiant capital, where causeways stretch like veins over a shimmering lake and market stalls buzz with the sound of barter and gossip. Incense wafts through the air, mingling with the scent of roasted maize and damp stone. You're probably just here for the tamales, but accidentally bumped into the wrong nobleman, and you might find yourself punished in ways your modern brain simply isn't ready for. Spoiler, you probably won't survive this. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And I'd love to know, where are you listening from and what time is it for you right now? Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You walk past guards draped in jaguar pelts, their obsidian clubs glinting in the sunlight. It's a good day. You haven't stolen anything, insulted a god, or skipped your tribute. Yet. Still, that doesn't stop you from noticing something odd near the ceremonial square. A young man lashed to a stake, surrounded by masked figures chanting in Nahuatl. You freeze, eyes wide. This isn't some ceremonial play. This is justice, Aztec style. The Aztecs didn't rely on prisons. Justice here is fast, brutal, and occasionally, baffling. Crimes didn't just offend people, they offended the gods. And when that happened, someone had to pay. With pain. With humiliation. Sometimes with glittery feathers and singing priests. You'd think in a society that gave us floating gardens and astronomical calendars, punishments would be reasonable. But no, these folks believe that justice should teach lessons and entertain bystanders. A stolen cloak could land you a public shaming, but stealing twice? You'd be executed with all the pageantry of a Broadway finale. Let's talk about that legal system. It was surprisingly organized. Courts operated at multiple levels: local, city, and imperial. Judges wore special costumes, some decked out in turquoise mosaic masks, and held court in public spaces where everyone could watch you squirm. The emperor himself, Huitzilopochtli, was technically the final authority, though he didn't bother with minor stuff like market theft or cactus trespassing. And then there were the Telpocali, schools for commoner boys, where obedience was drilled into you with both philosophy and physical pain. Discipline wasn't an afterthought, it was the Aztec vibe. Your parents could haul you in front of elders if you talked back. If found disrespectful, you'd be tied up and left near fire ants or have your hair singed for good measure. Historians still argue whether the system was more about rehabilitation or public spectacle. After all, being tied to a cactus as your neighbor's boo is more psychological warfare than anything else. But it's clear, the Aztecs wanted their laws remembered. Preferably with a side of chili smoke and drumbeats. Speaking of which, next to the central plaza, you spot another poor soul being dragged by the arm, forced to kneel. His crime? Talking back to a merchant. The punishment? A humiliating public apology while wearing a crown of flowers. The irony's not lost on you. It's like being forced to do stand-up comedy in a tutu. But the crowd loves it. They're laughing, cheering, throwing petals. And this guy? He's sobbing into his borrowed carnations. Just another Tuesday. One mainstream fact: Aztec laws were codified under Moctezuma I and enforced by judges who operated out of temples. That's right, your courtroom was also a sacred space. You weren't just offending the emperor, you were on thin ice with gods like Tezcatlipoca, who saw all, judged all, and had zero chill. But here's a fringe tidbit you probably didn't expect: punishment wasn't always physical. Some involved symbolic acts, like sweeping temple floors as penance or being banned from wearing certain colors. Yes, even fashion was regulated. Imagine losing the right to wear yellow because you cheated on your tribute payment. Talk about a social death. Now, as the sun dips low behind the temples, the marketplace is closing. You feel the buzz of nighttime rituals begin. Candles flicker, conch shells sound in the distance, and smoke from incense curls upward like ghostly fingers. But before you head home, you catch one last glimpse of the day's last trial. A woman accused of gossiping, yes, that was a punishable offense, is gently scolded by a priest, then handed a basket of tamales to distribute as an apology. It seems charming, until you realize she has to sing an apology song while dancing barefoot across sharp pebbles. Aztec justice was a performance, intended to shape society and keep cosmic balance. Every act, every punishment, was a thread in the fabric of their worldview. One mistake wasn't just a slip, it was a tear in the great divine quilt of the universe. So, as you pull your feathered cloak tighter and scurry toward your modest reed hut, maybe you'll think twice about sneaking that extra cacao bean. Or at least make sure no turquoise-masked judge is watching from the shadows. You wake up to the scent of tamales, but that's not what jolts you, it's the smoke. Thick, nose-burning, and suspiciously spicy. You cough, eyes watering, as two older men wave fans to waft more of it into a young man's face. He's tied to a wooden post. His crime? Stealing a handful of maize. His punishment? Chili smoke to the eyeballs. Yes, in the Aztec Empire, if you were a thief, especially a first-time offender, you might be spared death but sentenced to a punishment that made you wish you'd been more into farming than stealing. This particular smoke treatment came from grinding dried chili peppers into fine powder and throwing it onto burning coals. The result? A suffocating cloud that could render you breathless, blind, and begging. It's not just theatrical, it's effective. The pain lingers, the humiliation scorches, and the smell sticks to your tunic for days. And if you thought that was the end of your public roasting, just wait. For more stubborn offenders, or repeat thieves, there was the cactus. Specifically, being tied down and lashed against the spiky agave plant, your skin treated like a burrito wrap. People say this taught you not to steal. But historians still argue whether this was more of a punishment or a public demonstration of what happens when you disrespect the gods of sustenance. You pass a woman who mutters under her breath, "May you end up with chili smoke in your lungs." It's a curse now, a common phrase. Like telling someone to go step on a Lego, but with more cultural depth and significantly worse respiratory damage. Now, don't think this was all about being cruel for fun. The Aztecs genuinely believed crimes disrupted the cosmic balance. Stealing food meant you offended Tlaloc, the rain god who made crops grow. When you messed with the flow of maize and beans, you weren't just hurting a farmer, you were throwing a tantrum in front of a deity with lightning bolts. And let's not forget the importance of intent. Accidentally knock over someone's cocoa bowl? You might get a warning. But pickpocket a priest's bracelet? You're getting the cactus and the chili smoke. Possibly even some poetic insults thrown in for good measure. You see, Aztec punishment was layered. There was the pain, sure, but also the ritual, the symbolism, and the community's gaze. Everyone had to see it. That was the point. Your shame needed to echo down the street like a flute solo at sunrise. Quirky side note, some punishment rituals included costumed performers mimicking the accused during the penalty. So yes, you might be tied to a stake, coughing on spicy smoke, while a guy in a jaguar mask dances around pretending to steal imaginary beans. This was justice and comedy. Let's get into something even weirder, self-inflicted punishment as a preemptive strike. If you confessed a minor crime before anyone accused you, you could offer to be whipped or fast in a temple as an act of penance. The idea was that the gods would notice your initiative. Kind of like turning yourself into HR before anyone files the complaint. Now you walk past a group of children. They giggle as they run, but they glance nervously at an elder sweeping the plaza, a subtle reminder that even kids weren't exempt. If caught stealing or lying, they might be briefly tied and left in place, forced to listen to scolding chants. Harsh? Yes. Effective? Also yes. Childhood trauma builds strong future taxpayers. Historians debate the long-term effects of these punishments. Some argue they created an obedient, cohesive society. Others think it led to fear-based conformity and a lot of repressed childhood rage. Either way, nobody's risking a stolen tortilla here. You're thinking, okay, but what about the noble class? Surely they were spared these indignities? We'll get there. Spoiler, they got it worse. But for now, your attention is drawn to a merchant being dragged toward a small fire. His feet are bare. His eyes are darting wildly. Turns out, he was caught forging tribute tokens, counterfeit cocoa beans, basically. He's not just punished. He's punished creatively. They bind him to a small log and roll him slowly over burning embers, not to kill, but to burn the soles of his feet just enough. The lesson? Don't fake sacred currency. Also, shoes were a good idea. Modern asides aside, imagine this happening at your local farmer's market. Instead of calling security, people gather for chili smoke, cactus lashes, and feet on fire rolling. All before breakfast. The merchant cries out. The smell of scorched skin cuts through the tamale smoke. You avert your eyes. The crowd doesn't. Everyone is learning something, even you. Just then, a feathered priest steps in. He lays a hand on the merchant's shoulder and mutters a blessing. Not all punishments were forever. Some were designed to purify, restore the cosmic harmony, and let people move on. That doesn't mean they were gentle, but they had an ending. Sometimes, the most painful punishments weren't even physical. Public weeping. Formal apologies. Forced silence for a lunar cycle. Try going a month without speaking in your neighborhood. The pressure alone could melt you. So, as the crowd disperses and the sun rises higher, you keep walking. Careful now, don't bump into anyone. That flower seller might be a temple informant. That kid juggling chili peppers might be watching for thieves. And that little altar near the corn stand? That's not decoration, it's where they leave offerings to forgive minor crimes. You pull your cloak tight and resolve, no stealing. No lying. No stepping near any sacred corn. And if you ever do screw up, maybe just turn yourself in. It might save your lungs. You think you're safe because you've committed no crime. But let's say you got unlucky. Some neighbor accused you of gossiping, or being lazy, or eyeing their turkey suspiciously. You're marched to the plaza, not in chains but in flowers? Yes. Flowers. One of the stranger realities of Aztec punishment is that humiliation didn't always come with bruises or broken bones. Sometimes it came with petals. If your crime was social or moral, lying, cheating a neighbor, slacking on community work, you might be paraded through town wearing a flower crown. And not in a boho festival kind of way. Your hair is down. Your face is painted with charcoal. Your arms are draped with feathered streamers that flutter as you shuffle forward in embarrassment. Behind you, someone's beating a slow rhythm on a drum, a reminder that everyone's watching. And they are. Grandmothers peer from doorways. Kids giggle behind their hands. Merchants pause mid-sale to point. That flower crown may be soft, but the sting is real. One mainstream historical fact? The Aztecs loved ceremonial aesthetics. Flowers were used not just in worship, but in rituals of punishment. They symbolized both beauty and irony, offering visual contrast to your internal agony. You're supposed to look glorious while feeling ridiculous. And here's the kicker: part of your punishment is to speak. You're required to deliver a public apology or confession, often in flowery, poetic nahuatl. You must say how you wronged your neighbor, or your family, or the gods. You have to wax lyrical about your guilt, sometimes comparing your soul to a broken canoe, or a worm in the maze. Think of it as open mic night meets emotional breakdown. Some accounts suggest people were even given lines to recite by temple scribes, so your shame was scripted. One fringe tidbit? In particularly embarrassing cases, the offender was made to sing their apology. Like a sad karaoke solo, surrounded by feathers and pity. And the crowd? They were encouraged to laugh, to cheer, to throw petals or tortillas or, sometimes, cocoa shells. The idea wasn't cruelty, it was catharsis. A society policing itself through embarrassment, memory, and drama. Public shaming helped prevent future crimes. You don't forget the time you sobbed in floral garlands while reciting poetry about your moral failure. Historians still argue whether this was intended to rehabilitate, or simply crush the offender's ego. Was the flower punishment a gentle form of social correction, or just a sneaky way to mentally scar people into compliance? You follow a line of these flower offenders through the streets. One young man trips. His feathered anklets snag. A few people jeer. A masked priest raises an eyebrow and hisses something about disgracing the procession. Even punishments had decorum. The worst part? Your crime doesn't even have to be proven beyond a doubt. A respected elder's accusation could be enough to initiate public shaming. And no one wants to defy the elders, especially the ones wearing jaguar pelts and holding obsidian knives. So you go along with it. Smile through the flower crown. Cry just enough to show remorse. But it's not all bad. Some punishments end with redemption. At the end of the parade, you're led to a temple where a priest marks your wrist with red paint, a sign you've repented. You're given a small drink of pulque, the sacred agave brew, and a roasted maize cake. You're forgiven. Ish. Now let's flip this on its head for a second. What if you refuse the flower crown punishment? What if you declare your innocence, stand your ground, and dare the priest to prove your guilt? You might be challenged to a ritual test. These weren't exactly fair. You could be ordered to carry a heavy stone up temple steps, or hold your breath underwater. If you failed, divine judgment was obvious, you were guilty. Congrats. Now you get the flowers and the cactus. A particularly odd example? In some regions, a gossipy woman might be forced to sweep the street from sunrise to sunset, while wearing a mask made of bark and twigs. She looked like a sad garden spirit. And kids were encouraged to mock her as they passed. Effective? Probably. Scarring? Absolutely. You come across one final group, 2 men and a woman sitting in the temple courtyard, heads shaved, foreheads smeared with ash. They're ex-lovers, caught in a love triangle gone wrong. Their punishment? 3 days of silent service to the temple, cooking and cleaning in total silence, with eyes lowered. No speech, no glances. Just awkwardly sweeping the floor while everyone else talks about them in full voice. Again public. Again, painful in ways that bruises aren't. So you see, Aztec punishment wasn't always brutal in the way we expect. Sometimes, it was psychologically sharp. The equivalent of being subtweeted by your whole city, paraded in daisies, and turned into a living cautionary tale. You sit down near the marketplace steps, watching the last of the flower-crowned offenders vanish behind a painted gate. You can't help but wonder if modern justice systems lost something by ditching poetic humiliation. Sure, the cactus hurts. But your pride? that bleeds a little longer. As the drums fade and twilight glows against the temple walls, you know one thing for sure: you'll never look at a flower crown the same way again. You blink twice, thinking your eyes deceive you. But no, that's a man wearing nothing but white body paint and an elaborate headdress shaped like a serpent. He's crouched in a stone circle, surrounded by chanting villagers, and he's eating, yes, he's eating ants. Live ones? You've stumbled into one of the Aztec Empire's more obscure punishments: ritualized degradation. If the previous sections made you squirm with flower-crowned shame, this one will make your dignity crawl under a rock. Literally, in this guy's case. Here's the scene. You've wronged a powerful guild, say, the Stonecutters, or offended a patron deity by mocking a sacred animal. In return, you're sentenced not just to be mocked, but to become what you mocked. And sometimes that means dressing like a bug and feasting on them while people laugh, sing, and throw symbolic kernels of maize. Fringe? Sure. But it fits a pattern in Aztec society: punishments that were performative, layered with meaning, and bizarrely specific. You sidle up to a temple attendant who explains with mild disinterest that the man was overheard joking that ants were lazy gods. Blasphemy of the lowest level. His punishment? 3 days as an ant. Crawling posture. Bug diet. No speech. By the end of it, he'll probably never speak ill of insects again, or anything, really. This, becoming the offense, style of punishment was often tied to moral infractions, especially against nature spirits, animals, or tradespeople. The Aztecs believed everything, yes, even ants, was imbued with spiritual energy, or tonality. Mock it, and you disrupt the balance. Disrupt the balance, and you become the imbalance that must be corrected. Not with jail time, but by making you wear beetle wings and eat termites in front of your neighbors. Historians still argue whether this was meant to reform the offender or simply to entertain the crowd while reinforcing cosmic order. Was it sacred discipline, or just ancient performance art with a dash of humiliation? Either way, you don't want to be that guy in the dung beetle costume. And it wasn't just animals. Say you insulted the local weavers by claiming their thread was weak, or their dye smelled bad. You might be paraded through the market wrapped head to toe in scratchy, poorly made fabric while dragging a loom behind you. One recorded account, possibly exaggerated, mentions a man forced to unravel an entire hupel by hand while reciting verses about the goddess of weaving. Mainstream historical fact: many Aztec deities were patrons of trades and crafts. Weaving, fishing, pottery, stonecutting, each had a divine protector. Mocking or disrespecting a trade wasn't just rude. It was sacrilege. You weren't just making fun of someone's job, you were insulting their god. And that meant you had to live the disrespect you showed. Some punishments were even more surreal. There are tales of offenders being dressed as animals not to mimic them, but to inspire sympathy from the gods. A young boy caught lying might be painted like a spotted dog and led through the village on a leash, symbolizing obedience and humility. Children weren't usually harmed physically, but embarrassment, social correction, and intense metaphor? Fair game. You pass a woman kneeling in the dirt, her fingers stained blue from crushing berries. She murmurs something about returning the tongue to truth. Turns out, she lied about someone stealing her basket, and the false accusation caused a brief, and rather dramatic, temple dispute. Her punishment? A day of silence and berry staining. She's required to give dye to the person she wrongly accused. The blue apparently is symbolic of speech. By giving pigment, she's restoring what her words damaged. Poetic. And just confusing enough that you never want to lie in a temple again. Quirky detail: some punishments included food as both humiliation and redemption. Offenders were sometimes tasked with preparing vast meals for the very people they'd wronged. Imagine burning a neighbor's cloak in anger, only to spend a day roasting maize and plucking turkeys for their entire family. And yes, you'd have to serve it with a smile, and maybe a little salsa of apology. Another example walks by, literally. A woman with clay pots strapped to her back, neck, and arms like some avant-garde sculpture. She overcharged in the marketplace. Her punishment? Carried the burden of her greed, literally. The pots are empty, but they're clunky, symbolic, and she has to walk 3 laps around the plaza while announcing her pricing sins. Each time she trips, someone cheers. You glance down an alley and spot a boy standing in a pile of beans. Just standing. Weird, until you realize he wasted food. His punishment? Return to the field. By standing in the harvest, barefoot, for hours, he relearns the value of each seed. It's subtle, it's strange, and it makes a lasting impression. Some scholars argue this type of punishment kept Aztec cities remarkably orderly. People knew what might happen if they got cheeky. But it wasn't fear alone, it was the creative discomfort, the reputation damage, the way your punishment turned into an urban folktale. Long after you healed from the embarrassment, people still told the story of how you became the corn thief who had to dance in a maize mask at every solstice festival for 3 years. And that brings us to the truly ironic punishments. These were crafted with almost darkly comedic genius. A man who mocked a local poet was forced to memorize and recite his poems every day for a full moon cycle. In public. Wearing bells. He had to sing the lines, bow after each stanza, and carry a sign saying, "Words matter." Was it justice or stand-up comedy? Maybe both. The sun's setting now, the air growing cool. The man dressed like an ant crawls toward a bowl of mashed avocado. The crowd's thinned, but a few kids still point and whisper. This moment might stick with him forever. But maybe that's the point. You shift your weight, careful not to draw attention. Because tonight has made one thing very clear: in the Aztec world, punishment wasn't just pain, it was poetry, theater, and symbolic transformation. You didn't just suffer. You learned. You became your mistake. And hopefully, you only had to become it once. You think you've seen it all: flower-crowned shame, bug costume humiliation, poetic penance. But then you hear the unmistakable clink-clank of obsidian against bone. You turn, and there it is, an Aztec punishment that makes your stomach twist with both awe and mild terror. Welcome to the world of symbolic body harm, a uniquely Aztec blend of controlled pain, sacred symbolism, and dramatic flair. And before you panic, no, it's not quite torture. But it gets close enough to make your toes curl. There, in the center of the temple courtyard, kneels a teenager, no older than 15. His arms are stretched out, not in chains, but in deference. A priest with the steadiest hands you've ever seen dips a thin blade of obsidian into a bowl of pulque. Then, fast as a hummingbird, he nicks the boy's earlobe. Just enough to bleed. You wince. But the boy doesn't cry out. In fact, he bows his head and murmurs a prayer. That's because this punishment isn't just about suffering, it's about purification. The blood isn't just a consequence. It's an offering. It means, I accept responsibility. I offer this pain so the gods know I regret. Mainstream fact: bloodletting was common in Aztec rituals, not just for priests, but for everyday folks trying to cleanse guilt or show devotion. The punishment version simply pushed that line a bit further. You mess up? You bleed for balance. But it wasn't always the ears. A careless scribe might be pricked on the tongue with a thorn. A dishonest merchant might have the skin of his wrist lightly scored, as if to remind him how thin the line between wealth and ruin truly is. And sometimes the worst part wasn't the blood, it was the ritual around it. Take the ceremony of plasocamity, loosely meaning thankful pain. If you were caught committing an offense against your own family, say, disobeying your elders or publicly insulting your spouse, your punishment might be a symbolic cut on the foot. But before that, you'd have to walk barefoot across painted stones representing each family member. You'd pause on each one and chant their name aloud, explaining how you let them down. The cut at the end? Almost merciful after all that awkward honesty. Quirky tidbit: one recorded ritual involved offenders writing their sins on bark paper, tying the paper to their own ankle with a cactus fiber thread, and walking it to the temple, where the priest would burn the paper and cut the thread, sometimes nicking the skin beneath for emphasis. The wound was small, but the symbolism? Huge. You were cut free from guilt. Literally. And it didn't stop there. The Aztecs were nothing if not dramatic. Imagine being caught stealing maize from the public granary. You might be required to wear a white robe for 3 days, symbol of death and rebirth, and every morning, a priest would tap you on the shoulder with a bone rattle and say, "May your shadow walk straight again." Then, a single thorn pierced to the finger. Not enough to cripple. Just enough to remind. Historians still argue whether these punishments were truly about guilt or about control. Was it about restoring order in the soul, or just a really stylish way to keep people scared and obedient? The truth probably lies somewhere in the obsidian shimmer between fear and faith. And here's something even stranger: some of these blood punishments were requested. That's right. People would voluntarily ask for symbolic cuts as a way to purge shame, especially after dreams that were considered spiritually toxic. Dream you saw your dead grandmother scolding you in the marketplace? You might shuffle over to a temple, whisper your guilt, and offer your tongue for a thorn. Cleansing dream guilt with a drop of blood? Welcome to Aztec spirituality. It's night now, and the torches around the courtyard cast tall shadows. Another man approaches the platform, older, proud-looking, but clearly nervous. He confesses, through a translator, that he cut corners building a neighbor's roof. It collapsed during the rainy season. His punishment isn't prison, or even fines. It's a thin slice across the palm, followed by 2 days of service carrying water for the injured household. You watch as the priest nods solemnly. No shouting. No spectacle. Just ritual. A pause. A cut. A scar that whispers, "I did wrong, and now I carry the mark." The Aztecs had an almost poetic obsession with externalizing internal flaws. You lie? You bleed from the tongue. You steal? Your wrist is scored. You disrespect your family? Your foot walks on sharp stones. It's like a living checklist of morality, etched into the flesh. You come across a smaller shrine, quieter, older. An old woman with silver-streaked braids is pressing chili paste into tiny carved stones. Turns out, these stones were once used in punishment rituals for children, not through cutting, but through what you might call spicy repentance. Young kids caught misbehaving might have to inhale the pungent steam from burning chilies, or hold their breath while the smoke surrounded them. Mildly traumatic? Sure. But also strangely effective. No cuts. Just coughs. That's the thing, Aztec punishments had layers. Not everything drew blood. Sometimes, it was about endurance, symbolism, or just the memory of an intense smell. You pass a mural half-faded by time. It shows a warrior kneeling, his chest bared, a thin line of red running from his shoulder. Above him hovers an eagle with outstretched wings. The inscription roughly reads, "Pain is not punishment, it is promise." And somehow, that feels about right. Because here, pain isn't arbitrary. It's precise. Sacred. Scripted. A tool. A teacher. The courtyard clears. The blood is cleaned away with herbs and salt. The obsidian blades are returned to their resting place, glimmering faintly in the firelight. You exhale, slow and low. Tonight you learn something unnerving. In the Aztec Empire, guilt doesn't just sit in your heart. It walks in your feet, sings in your tongue, bleeds from your skin. It becomes part of the story your body tells. And if you're lucky, that story ends with forgiveness. You wake to the rustling of corn husks, the soft rhythm of sandals slapping earth, and a low chant that repeats like a lullaby made of thunder. It's the third time you've heard it today, and by now, you're learning what it means. Someone's about to get the dust walk. Of all the punishments in the Aztec Empire, this one is weirdly theatrical and unsettlingly quiet. It doesn't draw blood or raise shouts. It's simple, almost elegant. You walk. And everyone watches. But not just anywhere. No, you walk in circles, literally and figuratively. You're led toward a sun-drenched plaza where a young man stands at the center, his arms painted with winding black spirals, his face smeared with pale yellow ochre. He doesn't speak. He doesn't look up. Instead, he just walks. 3 steps forward. 1 step back. Always clockwise. Always keeping rhythm with the low drumbeat coming from a priest seated in the shade. Turns out, he was caught lying in court. A big deal, since the Aztecs held truth as a sacred cornerstone of Teotl, divine order. His punishment isn't lashes or prison. It's to walk the spiral of contrition, barefoot, until sunset. He must not speak. He must not break stride. If he does, he starts over. It looks simple. But as the hours drag on, the heat builds, and the dust kicks up into his eyes, it becomes a quiet kind of torment. A trial of humility, patience, and endurance. Some say this punishment was meant to symbolize the cyclical nature of wrong and redemption. Others say it was just a very polite way to break someone's will. Historians still argue whether the dust walk had roots in ritual, theater, or bureaucracy. Was it an inherited spiritual drama, or just a practical tool to shame people without bruising them? Either way, it worked. And it wasn't just for liars. There were other versions of the walk. A negligent father might carry a symbolic burden, a large rock carved with a crying child's face, as he circled the family shrine. A greedy merchant could be made to walk with maize tied to his arms and chilies in his mouth, a gentle reminder that hunger and fire come for all, eventually. Here comes one now, an older woman with silver threads in her hair, balancing 2 small gourds filled with honey. Her crime? Diluting honey wine with too much water and selling it during a forbidden moon phase. She's been sentenced to the sweet walk, a spiral path traced with flower petals and ash, representing the sweetness she corrupted and the ash she left behind. She'll pace it until the gourds spill, or the sun sets, whichever comes first. Quirky detail. In one fringe account, an offender had to walk the spiral path while wearing a wooden mask shaped like his own face, painted upside down. A literal face of shame. It wobbled slightly on his head with every step, reminding onlookers that his world had been flipped. Sometimes, the punishment got performative. In marketplaces, small public spiral tracks were laid with colored sands, and offenders had to walk them while crowds offered silent stares or mock gifts. A woman who tried to pass off dyed turkey feathers as real quetzal plumes was made to walk a spiral lined with chicken feathers while children recited bird calls at her. You're getting the picture. This wasn't just punishment, it was public theater with a moral twist. A town-wide episode of "You messed up, now dance." But don't let the soft edges fool you. The spiral walks could be mentally brutal. Walking for hours under the hot sun, unable to speak, burdened by props or symbols, with no destination except back to where you started. It messes with your mind. That's kind of the point. Aztec society prized rhythm and repetition. Their calendar was cyclical. Their rituals ran on solar loops. This punishment plugged you into that rhythm, painfully. You became part of the cycle you disrupted. And by enduring it, you were meant to be reset. Mainstream fact: the Aztecs believed spiritual and moral missteps created ripples in the cosmic balance. Unlike many cultures that viewed crime as breaking man-made law, the Aztecs often saw it as tearing a hole in the divine weave of existence. The punishment? Stitch yourself back in, slowly, publicly, one step at a time. You pass a boy being gently guided onto a chalk spiral with his head bowed. His mistake? He disobeyed an elder and broke a ceremonial flute. No injury, no theft, just disrespect. His walk lasts until a priest finishes reciting a prayer of correction. About an hour, maybe 2. This one's a quiet rite. No shouting, no shame signs. Just soft drumbeats and a scattering of petals. You realize some of these punishments were as much for reconciliation as correction. By enduring, you weren't just paying. You were rejoining. There's something unexpectedly moving about that. Not every punishment was a spectacle of suffering. Sometimes it was walking in circles until you remembered who you were. Until others remembered your worth, too. You overhear a merchant explain to a customer that her nephew had to do the spiral walk last year, for yelling at a festival drummer. He cried, she says with a shrug. But now he keeps the beat. Not all spirals were physical either. In one curious account, a shamed poet was given a different kind of loop. He had to rewrite the same verse in different metaphors 100 times over, presenting a new version each morning to the temple school. A spiral of language. By the 83rd version, he found enlightenment, or exhaustion. Either way, he stopped cursing the rain god. You look back to the main plaza. The dust rises softly around the spiral walker's ankles. The black spiral paint on his arms is smeared with sweat. But he doesn't stop. Not yet. Each circle, a quiet prayer. Each step, a breath closer to balance. And finally, the drum stops. The priest raises a hand. The boy freezes. He kneels. Forgiveness, delivered not in words, but in silence. The spiral walk is over. By now, you've witnessed the Aztec flair for drama, symbolic wounds, shameful walks, and chilly steam penance. But just when you think their punishments couldn't get more bizarre, you round a corner and hear laughter? Not mocking. Not cruel. Just pure, head thrown back, snorting giggles coming from a crowd gathered around a small public square. You push closer, and you can hardly believe what you see. There, balancing on a teetering log, dressed head to toe in mismatched colors, is a man with a squash on his head. It's tied with twine, painted with jaguar spots, and slowly dripping sticky pulp down his face. Behind him, 2 barefoot kids bang drums off-key while an old woman fans him dramatically with maize husks. Welcome to punishment as comedy, a favorite in the Aztec justice buffet for relatively minor offenses. It's goofy. It's exaggerated. And yes, it's still a form of deeply ritualized correction. But instead of blood or silence, you pay for your social sins with embarrassment and physical awkwardness. Basically, if the spiral walk was a poetic TED Talk on morality, this is Aztec slapstick with cosmic consequences. Mainstream fact: the Aztecs believed laughter had power, cleansing power. Certain deities, like Huahuacatl, the old coyote god of mischief, were honored through chaotic, playful rituals. When society needed a breather, or when someone messed up just enough to warrant correction without cruelty, humor became the tool. The squash-hatted man? He was caught boasting about a military victory he didn't actually earn. Not a huge crime, but one that disrespected the warrior's code. So now, His punishment is twofold. He must act like a bumbling fool in the village square for an entire morning, wearing symbols of fertility and cowardice, the squash, a fruit tied to false growth, and a painted tail hanging from his belt. He's also required to recite a mocking poem about himself, rhyming his supposed valor with, well, pretty much any word that rhymes with lizard. A local priest oversees the whole thing, occasionally blowing a conch shell and nodding seriously, as if this slapstick circus were as sacred as any bloodletting. And here's the twist, it kind of is. You shift your gaze to a painted wall nearby. A mural shows scenes of ritual comedy, people wearing oversized hummingbird beaks, crawling backwards, or holding tortillas like shields. Beneath it, a message. The heart grows lighter when it knows its weight. Quirky tidbit. In one festival-linked punishment, offenders who misbehaved during sacred dances were made to wear costumes made entirely of corn husks and dance solo in the town square, doing their best impression of a maize spirit who forgot the steps. Failed to entertain the crowd? You'd have to repeat it with dried chilies tied to your ankles. There's even a record of a tax collector who skimmed from the temple coffers being made to dress like a golden frog, a symbol of greed, and hop around the plaza croaking songs about how gold makes frogs blind. The public roared with laughter, but no one forgot his face. Or his crime. Historians still argue whether this laughter justice was primarily rehabilitative or just an early form of social shaming. Was it about letting people back in through mockery, or was it just a gentle way of booting them out of respect circles for a while? Either way, the effects were memorable. No one wants to be remembered as the guy who had to act like a confused pineapple in front of the high priest. And it wasn't limited to men. Women, too, could be subjected to ritual comedy, usually with more symbolic restraint. One account describes a young woman who secretly hoarded love charms and was caught selling them near a temple. Her punishment? She had to wear a robe made of cactus pads, carefully trimmed, don't worry, and walk in a small circle reciting increasingly absurd romantic advice, like, offer your beloved a tortilla shaped like a lizard, for this shows bravery. You spot a group of children giggling as they place flower petals in a ring around a seated teenager. He's been caught bragging that he could summon rain better than the local weather priest. So now, his penance is to wear a tiny clay cloud on his head and attempt to make everyone wet using only a hollowed-out gourd and some spit. It's hilarious. It's also incredibly awkward. And the laughter, while playful, has teeth. The lesson? Pride goes splat. But here's where it gets deeper. At the end of the performance, once the offender has fully embarrassed themselves, the crowd falls silent. A short chant is sung. The priest steps forward. A symbolic object, maybe a feather or a painted stone, is handed to the performer, signifying that the community accepts their apology. They've laughed, they've groaned, and now they forgive. You feel a surprising softness in this ritual. In a society known for its brutal warrior class and spine-tingling rituals, the use of comedy as punishment feels almost revolutionary. It's restorative. Intimate. A way to let someone stay in the tribe, even after they've messed up. You take a seat beside a wrinkled elder who whispers, "Laughter is the wind that cleans the heart." And you kind of get it now. The Aztecs knew that not every mistake needed blood. Some needed blushes. Some needed bad rhymes and squashes on heads. And maybe, just maybe, that's a little more terrifying, because your punishment now lives in everyone's memory, but also in their smiles. The squash-hatted man finishes his poem, bows deeply, causing the squash to slide forward over his eyes, and stumbles theatrically off stage. The crowd cheers, and a child hands him a cup of cocoa. Forgiveness served warm. You stand and stretch, your own face warmed by the sun and the laughter around you. For all the obsidian, the drums, and the sacred blood. This feels like the soul of Aztec justice. Dramatic, meaningful, and just absurd enough to make you think twice before running your mouth. You awaken to a sound you haven't heard before, a low, rhythmic squelching, like someone dragging wet leather across stone. It's oddly hypnotic, and when you peek around the edge of a temple courtyard, you realize what you're hearing. Feet. Bare, muddy, bleeding feet, walking across a carpet of sharp obsidian flakes. Yep. This isn't slapstick anymore. You've entered the zone of sacred penitence, where spiritual misconduct meets an almost poetic kind of self-inflicted agony. And here in the Aztec world, pain can be a currency of redemption, so long as it's offered willingly. The man on the path is flanked by 2 priests. He's not bound. He's not prodded. He walks of his own accord, expression neutral, hands folded. Each step cuts slightly deeper into his soles. The path of obsidian is about 40 feet long. He's made it halfway. You wince. Why is he doing this? Because he chose it. This was known as the path of reflection, a punishment reserved for individuals who committed moral or spiritual violations that were neither criminal nor casual, things like breaking an oath to the gods, refusing to participate in communal rites, or dishonoring a deceased relative. And here's the kicker, sometimes, you weren't even punished externally. You were expected to punish yourself. Mainstream fact, the Aztecs had a complex relationship with self-sacrifice. It wasn't just priests and warriors offering blood. Regular people, when faced with moral failure, could offer cuts, burns, fasts, and physical trials to restore their place in the sacred cosmic balance. The path of reflection was one of many options. You could also do nettle fasting, rubbing stinging nettles on your arms and legs for days while abstaining from maize and cacao. Or if you were a high-status offender, you might choose the trial of fire echoes. Quirky tidbit. That one involved kneeling before a series of shallow clay pots filled with burning copal incense. You had to lean over each one, inhale deeply, and chant an apology while your nose and face were lightly singed. Symbolically, your words would rise with the smoke, scorched but purified. But back to our obsidian walker. He's almost at the end now. Blood dots each step behind him. A priest chants softly, and when the man reaches the final slab, he kneels. A bowl of warm water is placed before him. He dips his hands, wipes his feet, and presses his forehead to the stone. The ritual is over. Historians still argue whether these acts were punishment or sacrifice. Was the goal personal growth, spiritual realignment, or simply appeasement of cosmic forces? The truth is probably some complicated blend. The Aztecs didn't see penance as degrading. It was sacred theater, intimate, grueling, but often redemptive. Of course, not everyone got to choose their penance. A few paces away, a teenage boy lies prostrate before a tiny temple shrine. His wrists are bound loosely with maize fibers, more ceremonial than secure. 4 elders sit in a square around him, each holding a different object: a feather, a cacao bean, a shard of jade, and a chili pepper. The boy's crime? Speaking the name of a sacred ancestor during a drunken joke. A spiritual faux pas, not a crime in the traditional sense, but deeply offensive during festival season. His punishment is the rite of 4 elements. Each elder will touch their item to the boy's lips and whisper a reminder. Words are powerful. The feather symbolizes speech, the cacao bean, sweetness turned bitter, the jade, value tarnished, and the chili? Well, that's a hot tongue you've got there. You watch as the chili touches his lips last. He flinches. The elders nod. Unlike the spiral walk or the comic trials, these rituals are private, somber, almost tender. You can tell this punishment isn't about humiliation. It's about reconnection with the gods, the ancestors, the rhythm of society. But not all private punishments are spiritual. Some are straight up psychological. You pass a low adobe building where two older women sit in silence. Inside, someone is undergoing the reflection seclusion, a practice for certain young offenders who showed signs of pride, disobedience, or laziness. No pain. No spectacle. Just 3 days in isolation, guided by whispered lessons, cold food, and hours spent copying glyphs of moral proverbs into the dirt with a stick. It's eerie. Effective, too. One scholar called it the Aztec version of being grounded. If your grandma was a trained philosopher. You overhear one of the women muttering. He said a priest was boring. Let him meditate on silence. By this point, you realize something strange. Aztec punishments weren't always about fear. Sometimes, they were about invitation. An invitation to realign. To think. To sweat. To suffer, but in a sacred frame. One last scene catches your eye before you move on. A young noblewoman, seated before a smoking censer, cradling a stone. She was caught hoarding tribute goods meant for temple offerings. Her punishment? She must carry the stone of return, a heavy basalt tablet engraved with her family crest, on her back during dawn prayers for a full moon cycle. She wears it now, roped to her shoulders, sitting in absolute stillness. Her face is calm. Penitence worn with pride. And so, the Aztec world continues to surprise you. Not just with its extremes, but with its layers. This isn't simply a culture of terror or severity. It's a culture of balance, rhythm, and consequence, where wrongs echo through both body and spirit, and where redemption is sometimes just a blister away. The man from earlier emerges from the obsidian path. His feet are bandaged, his gait slow, but there's a serene kind of strength in his posture. As if he walked through fire and found his way back whole. Here, pain can purify. And you're starting to understand why people volunteered to feel it. The quiet from the obsidian path still hums in your ears as you drift through a forested edge of the ceremonial grounds. The sky has deepened into a smoky lavender, and the air smells like roasted maize and damp earth. You start to think maybe you've reached the limits of Aztec punishment. Then drums. Slow, deliberate, and oddly off. You follow the sound into a torchlit clearing and freeze. There, under a woven canopy and surrounded by flower garlands, stands a young man. His ankles are shackled, not cruelly, but enough to make his movements awkward. His face is painted half white, half black. He's dancing. Except, not well. His steps falter. His eyes dart to the drummers, confused. The rhythm changes, again, and again, he stumbles. You realize the beat is designed to trip him up. And this isn't a dance for celebration. It's punishment. You're watching a ritual known among some scholars as the disharmony dance, used to penalize individuals who disrupted communal ceremonies. Imagine someone who laughed during a funeral, or showed up drunk to a rain invocation. Mainstream fact: the Aztecs placed enormous importance on ritual timing, sacred music, and rhythm. Every ceremony, whether it honored a god, marked a harvest, or predicted celestial change, had a precise choreography. Disrupting that wasn't just rude. It was cosmically offensive. So the disharmony dance flips the offense on its head. The disruptor must now move in disharmony to the tribe. Purposefully misaligned, they must perform a clumsy, jarring solo in front of a crowd that offers no feedback, no applause, just pure, unblinking observation. The punishment is public, but there's no laughter here. Just the beat, twisting, skipping, reversing. Even you feel uncomfortable watching. But then it gets weirder. Quirky tidbit: part of the punishment sometimes included wearing sandals filled with tiny pebbles. That way, the longer you danced, the more you massaged, or aggravated, your own balance. And for extra symbolic flair, the dancer had to carry a small mirror tied to their chest, constantly reflecting their own struggle. You notice the young man glancing down at his mirror. It wobbles with each misstep, catching torchlight and messy flickers. He's literally watching his failure unfold. But he doesn't stop. Because he can't. This goes on for almost an hour. Eventually, the drummers strike a final, clean rhythm. The youth drops to his knees, panting. A priest walks forward, unties the mirror, and smears a dab of ochre on the dancer's chest. It's done. The punishment ends not with applause, but with silence. Historians still argue whether these rhythm-based penalties were humiliating, therapeutic, or perhaps even mystical in origin. Some point to the god Tezcatlipoca, he of the obsidian mirror, as the likely inspiration. Others think it was simply an elegant way to teach rhythm to the rhythm breaker. Whatever the case, it stuck with you. You find yourself walking more slowly, listening to your own steps. But the night isn't done yet. In a nearby courtyard, you spot a young couple seated opposite an elder woman. Between them lies a low clay bowl filled with ashes and broken corn husks. The girl looks ashamed. The boy furious. You eavesdrop cautiously. Turns out, they've violated one of the core taboos, premarital intimacy before a sacred feast day. Not criminal, per se, but a direct offense to household gods and family honor. Their punishment is the cycle of cooling words, a structured, elder-led session of confession, retelling, and ceremonial silence. 3 nights of it, to be exact. Tonight is night 1, the burning words round, where both must say exactly what they did, how they feel about it, and what damage they may have caused. The elder listens, pokes the ashes with a stick, and occasionally asks sharp questions like, "What did you owe the gods that you gave to each other instead?" No yelling. No punishment stalks. Just pointed dialogue, and long stretches of uncomfortable silence. And you realize something again, the Aztecs weren't just brutal. They were deeply psychological. They could get inside your head and rearrange your guilt like a puzzle. You wander on, through a grove of sleeping iguanas and murmuring trees, and reach another unusual sight, a woman tying hundreds of tiny clay bells to her shawl. At first, you think it's decorative. Then you notice the pattern. She's part of the bell burden penance, a practice imposed on community gossips. Yep, she talked too much, and not in the fun way. She spread tales during a marriage negotiation ceremony, accidentally ruining it. Now, for 5 days, she must wear these bells every time she walks in public. They don't hurt, but they make it impossible for her to be unnoticed. Even her breathing makes a sound. She's not mocked. No one hurls insults. But every step is a reminder, words travel. One elder, passing by, nods with dry approval. "May your silence sound sweeter than your chatter," he says. You're starting to sense a theme. These punishments don't always break the body. Sometimes they bend the soul. They nudge the ego into corners and make it sit there, thinking. And for the Aztecs, that might have been the most powerful punishment of all. Because physical pain fades. But knowing the entire market square hears you jingling with every step? That sticks. You glance up at the stars. They seem brighter tonight. Or maybe it's just the absence of drums, bells, and barefoot dancers now fading into the past. You let your breath match the quiet beat of your own footsteps. The rhythm's back. You're in harmony again. The dawn light filters softly through woven reed blinds, carrying the scent of fresh tortillas and the sharp tang of chili. You feel the weight of last night's spectacle lingering in your bones, as if the echoes of offbeat drums and jingling bells still pulse through the village. But the day offers a different kind of punishment, one less public, but no less potent, the silent labor. It's a curious blend of exile and responsibility, where the offender is assigned grueling work while forbidden from speaking a single word. Imagine spending hours weaving baskets or grinding maize, your tongue tied by sacred decree, your mind churning with every unspoken apology. Mainstream fact: the Aztecs valued silence highly in ritual contexts. Speech was sacred and powerful, and silence was sometimes seen as a path to clarity, humility, and self-control. Silent labor punished the prideful and talkative by stripping them of voice and forcing them into contemplative, physical effort. You spot a middle-aged woman bent over a large grinding stone, her hands worn and steady. She was caught gossiping, seriously enough to sow discord among a prominent family. The silence suits her solemn expression, but you can see the tension in her jaw as she presses maize into flour. Nearby, a young man is carrying bundles of firewood, his lips pressed in and pale. His offense? Mocking a priest during a festival. Now, he moves silently, hauling the weight of his disrespect through the dust, unable even to mutter a defense. Quirky tidbit: the punishment wasn't just silence and toil. In some cases, the silent laborer had to wear a small, pointed headdress called a tlatlacali, literally, tongue-tied. It was a thin strip of cloth wrapped tight enough to remind the wearer of their vow, but loose enough to avoid suffocation. This visual cue made the punishment unmistakable to onlookers. There's an eerie dignity in the scene. No yelling, no beatings, no public spectacle. Just the quiet rhythm of work and the absence of words. You start to think about how much energy goes into just keeping your mouth shut, and how much more so when it's demanded by a community and a belief system. Historians still argue whether silent labor was more effective as a deterrent or a form of spiritual cleansing. Some believe the forced silence led to deep self-reflection, while others suggest it was more about social control, cutting the offender off from gossip and influence. But here's the twist: at the end of the punishment, the laborer would return to the community with a new role, a listener. They were granted special status during ceremonies, trusted to absorb wisdom and keep secrets. Silent labor wasn't just punishment, it was a pathway to respect. You imagine the change, from the village chatterbox to the wise observer, from the loud mouth to the silent heart. It's a transformation as subtle as it is profound. Nearby, a priest watches over the workers with an unreadable expression. He carries a small obsidian blade, not for punishment, but for symbolic cutting of ties. Once the silent labor is complete, the blade is traced gently across the offender's tongue, signaling the end of their vow and their reintegration. You can't help but admire the ritual's complexity. It's less flashy than the comic trials or the path of reflection, but its quiet power lingers long after the grinding stones fall silent. As the sun climbs higher, the workers begin to share stolen glances and barely perceptible nods, a secret camaraderie born of shared hardship. The punishment isolates, yes, but it also creates bonds. You pause, watching a breeze catch a thread of corn silk, carrying it lazily across the courtyard. There's a soft whisper in the air, almost like a voice trapped between silence and song. The Aztec world, with its obsidian blades and fiery rituals, has room for silence too. And sometimes silence is the loudest lesson of all. The day wanes as the sun slides behind the towering pyramids, casting long shadows that stretch like fingers across the stone plazas. The air smells faintly of copal incense mixed with the sharp bite of roasted chilies, and the hum of the city softens into a gentle murmur. Your feet lead you toward the bustling market square, but something pulls your attention to a smaller, more solemn scene. A line of people stands quietly before a stone altar, each clutching a small bundle wrapped in colorful cloth. They aren't criminals, exactly, but participants in a curious ritual punishment called the Tribute of Tears. Mainstream fact: in Aztec society, tribute wasn't just tax. It was a sacred exchange between the people and their rulers, between mortals and gods. Failing to pay or trying to cheat the system was a serious offense, sometimes punishable by public acts of penance and restitution. The tribute of tears involves offenders bringing gifts to the temple and publicly admitting their failure. But here's the twist: the gifts are symbolic, often representing personal loss or emotional weight, things like broken pottery, wilted flowers, or cracked shells. You watch as a young woman steps forward, her hands trembling. Her crime? Selling more goods on the black market than allowed. She lays down a small bundle containing a cracked obsidian mirror and a few faded feathers. She bows deeply, tears welling in her eyes. Quirky tidbit: the punishment includes an unusual ritual where the offender must recount the story of their failure while the crowd watches silently. Each tear shed is considered a tribute, a physical token of remorse. In some accounts, the more tears, the more effective the penance. The ritual seems almost theatrical, but there's an undeniable gravity to it. You notice others wiping their eyes, even those who aren't part of the ceremony. It's a communal acknowledgement that failure, guilt, and redemption are shared human experiences. Historians still argue whether the tribute of tears was primarily a form of social control or a genuine spiritual cleansing. Some suggest it reinforced community bonds by making wrongdoing visible but forgivable. Others see it as a way to humiliate and deter. As the young woman steps back, a priest sprinkles water over the offerings and whispers a prayer. The crowd disperses quietly, leaving behind a lingering sense of catharsis. Nearby, an old man chuckles softly and leans over to a child, whispering, "Better to pay with tears than with blood." You can't decide if he's serious or teasing. You wander through the market, now lit by flickering torches, watching vendors packing up their wares and families settling in for evening meals. The city's pulse slows, but the lessons of the day, of pain, silence, reflection, and tears, settle deep in your mind. The Aztecs weren't just brutal or theatrical, they were profoundly human. Their punishments were woven into the fabric of life, teaching respect, humility, and connection. And in that moment, you feel strangely grateful for the gentle softness of your own quiet night ahead. Night deepens and you find yourself wandering near the edge of the sacred precinct, where a low hum of chanting drifts through the trees. The scent of roasted cacao mingles with the earth, rich and warm. Ahead, a circle of figures sit cross-legged around a shallow pit, its embers glowing faintly red. They're engaged in a lesser-known punishment practice called the trial of shadows. This one's all about confronting your own fears. Mainstream fact: the Aztecs believed that personal failings and sins could manifest as spiritual shadows, dark, invisible forces clinging to the soul. The trial of shadows was a ritualized encounter designed to help offenders recognize and symbolically defeat their inner darkness. Tonight, the person undergoing the trial is a young warrior accused of cowardice in battle, a serious stigma in a culture that prized bravery and honor. He's blindfolded, arms outstretched, and seated in front of the glowing pit. Elders chant softly, their voices rising and falling like the flicker of the fire. Suddenly, the warrior's hands brush something soft and cold. It's a bundle of feathers, symbolizing lightness and freedom. Then, a brush of smoke passes over his face. The elders murmur phrases that translate roughly as, "Face what you hide, and let it burn away." Quirky tidbit: the trial often included a component where the offender was asked to name their greatest fear aloud, sometimes confessing to shame, failure, or loss. This verbalization was considered an act of courage itself. The blindfold is removed slowly, and the warrior's eyes meet those of the elders. The fire's glow reflects in his pupils, and for a moment, you sense a deep calm settling over him. Historians still argue about the psychological impact of such trials. Did they truly help individuals overcome internal struggles? Or were they more about reinforcing social expectations of courage? You notice how the elders carefully tend the fire, adding herbs like copal and sage, believed to purify the spirit. The smoke curls upward, carrying prayers to the gods. The warrior stands, his posture steadier, shoulders squared. The trial isn't about punishment in the physical sense, it's about transformation. You imagine how many others might have faced similar shadows in this way, wrestling their fears beside flickering flames. Nearby, a woman who has just completed her own trial of shadows smiles softly, her face glowing with quiet relief. She cradles a small obsidian amulet, an emblem of renewed strength. You can't help but think that in this culture of pain and spectacle, there's also a space for healing and hope. As you step away from the circle, the night air cools and the firelight dims behind you. The city around you exhales, readying itself for sleep. The Aztecs have shown you their extremes, the bizarre punishments, the public humiliations, the silent labors. But also their depths, the rituals of rebirth, the rites of passage that shape a community as much as the individual. You carry that with you now, the shadows and the light, intertwined. The night stretches long as you meander into the quiet of a residential compound. Flickering oil lamps cast warm, dancing shadows over painted walls and carved wooden beams. The smell of damp stone and drying herbs wraps around you, like a soft cloak. You're drawn to a small courtyard where a solitary figure is kneeling before a low altar. The air is thick with the scent of burning rosemary and crushed flowers. This is the scene of the silent weeping punishment, a practice so subtle, it could almost slip past an untrained eye. Mainstream fact: the Aztecs believed that emotional restraint was both a virtue and a source of spiritual imbalance. Silent weeping was a punishment assigned to those who showed excessive public anger or sorrow, thought to disrupt social harmony. Here, the offender was required to mourn privately, often in isolation, for a set period, days, sometimes weeks, without speaking or making any outward show of grief or frustration. The kneeling figure is a woman, hands folded in her lap, eyes fixed on a small bowl of water. Her shoulders shake lightly, silent tears falling unheard. Quirky tidbit: some sources describe how the offender was given a tiny obsidian blade, not to wound themselves, but to scratch subtle patterns into their skin. These marks were personal and secret, a private ledger of pain meant only for the self. It was a way of externalizing sorrow without disturbing the community. You watch her trace faint lines across her wrist, a slow, deliberate ritual that seems almost meditative. Historians still debate whether silent weeping was an effective form of emotional control or a form of psychological torment. Some argue it encouraged introspection and healing, while others believe it enforced harmful repression. A nearby priest watches silently, occasionally offering a gentle nod or a whispered prayer. There's no rush here. The punishment is a slow burn, like letting water wear down stone. You're struck by the contrast to the loud public punishments, the disharmony dance, the bell-burden penance, the comic trials. This one is invisible, inward, a private reckoning. You find yourself wondering what it must feel like to hold such quiet grief for so long, alone with your thoughts and the shadows of your mistakes. Nearby, a child tiptoes past, clutching a bundle of marigolds, the scent bright and cheerful in the night air. It's a small reminder that life and death, joy and sorrow, always coexist. You take a deep breath, the cool air filling your lungs with a strange mixture of sadness and hope. Because even in punishment, the Aztecs found ways to honor the complexity of human emotion, the silent weeping, the hidden scars, the slow healing. You let the silence settle around you, soft and profound. The night deepens and the city's heartbeat slows to a gentle pulse. But you're drawn toward the towering temples where shadows gather like whispered secrets. Here, in a secluded chamber lit only by flickering candlelight, you find the site of the feathered mask punishment. It's not as brutal as the tortures you've seen before. No sharp blades or public humiliation. Instead, this is a punishment of identity, forced transformation, and the stripping of personal pride. Mainstream fact: the Aztecs used masks extensively in rituals, both sacred and secular. Masks symbolized gods, animals, and human traits. Wearing one was powerful; it could elevate or diminish the wearer's status. The feathered mask punishment involved the offender wearing a cumbersome mask made of brightly colored feathers, often shaped like a bird or serpent. But here's the catch: the mask represented an animal or spirit that embodied a negative trait, laziness, foolishness, or cowardice. You see a young man struggling beneath a heavy mask shaped like a vulture's head, feathers drooping over his shoulders. He was caught shirking his communal duties, a serious offense in a culture that prized hard work and cooperation. Quirky tidbit: sometimes, the punishment lasted days, and the offender had to perform menial tasks while wearing the mask, carrying water, cleaning temples, or even reciting prayers. The mask was a constant reminder of their failure and the need for redemption. The weight of feathers makes every movement awkward, every breath heavier. You can almost feel the sting of public gaze as villagers pass by, some whispering, others avoiding eye contact. Historians still argue about the origins and purpose of this punishment. Was it a form of shaming designed to teach humility, or a ritual cleansing allowing the wearer to symbolically shed their flaws? Nearby, a priest gently removes the mask from a previous wearer, a woman whose mask resembled a timid rabbit. She smiles faintly, a mix of relief and acceptance. The transformation is complete. You think about how masks can both hide and reveal. In this punishment, they do both, forcing the offender to carry their shame openly, yet offering a path toward change. The courtyard around you feels alive with stories of failure and redemption, of punishment and forgiveness woven tightly together. You take a slow breath, feeling the cool night air wash over you, and wonder how many others have worn such masks and walked this delicate line between disgrace and renewal. The Aztecs knew the power of symbols. And tonight you've witnessed their darkest and most vivid. The sky is now velvet black, stars strewn across it like crushed quartz. The city's noise has faded into a hush broken only by the distant lilt of night birds and the soft shuffle of temple guards changing shifts. You walk slowly now, heavy with the weight of all you've witnessed. But before you can retreat into rest, there's one final punishment to observe, one that doesn't burn, bleed, or bind. Instead, it disappears you. This is the name erasure. Mainstream fact: in Aztec culture, names held immense spiritual and social power. To name someone was to give them identity, lineage, and a destiny. To erase that name, publicly and ceremonially, was one of the most severe non-lethal punishments in the empire. A man stands alone before a priest on a step dais, not in chains, not bruised, but trembling nonetheless. His offense? Repeated betrayal of trust, misusing communal resources and manipulating others for personal gain. The priest, solemn and slow, reads his full name aloud one last time. The syllables echo over the plaza like a fading drumbeat. Quirky tidbit: the ritual involved crushing the offender's name glyph on a clay tablet, one that had been inscribed with reverence at birth. The shards were then scattered into Lake Texcoco or buried beneath a cactus to be forgotten. And just like that, the man becomes no one. No one calls his name. He is not spoken of in ceremonies. He can't marry, hold property, or participate in ritual life. Not even as a criminal. He's a social ghost, living among others but not of them. You watch him step down, his face blank. There's no crowd to jeer or applaud, just silence. A punishment that cuts deeper than bone, erasure. Historians still argue whether name erasure truly wiped someone from memory or made them even more infamous. Some believe it stripped the soul of its anchor in the world, Others argue it created legends out of the forgotten. You see children peeking from behind a column, whispering about the man they can't name. His figure fades into the dark, swallowed by the quiet hum of the sleeping city. And you can't help but wonder, what's worse? The lash of pain, or the chill of being unseen? The Aztecs understood the spectrum of suffering. They knew that punishment could be loud or silent, physical or spiritual. And sometimes the deepest wounds are the ones that leave no mark. The stars are brighter now. The fires are low. And your journey through this strange, ancient world of discipline, theater, and transformation is finally drawing to a close. You breathe out, slow and steady. The firelight that once danced wildly across punishment plazas and temple courtyards is now a soft ember in your memory. The noise, the laughter, the gasps, the quiet weeping, all dissolve into the hush of the present. The Aztecs didn't just punish to hurt. They punished to remind, to renew, to balance the grand weave of the universe. Justice wasn't a straight line, it was a cycle, shaped by gods, community, and a deep, sometimes unsettling understanding of human nature. You've seen masks and feathers, silence and tears, humor and shame. You've watched as names were broken like clay and scattered to the wind. And through it all, you've walked a delicate thread, between fear and fascination, judgment and awe. Let your shoulders soften now. Let your breath fall into rhythm with the whispering breeze outside your window, or maybe the low whir of a fan. Your eyes might feel a little heavier, your mind just a little quieter. Because tonight you've wandered far, through punishment both bizarre and profound. And now, it's time to return, not with dread, but with wonder. Knowing that even in the darkest corners of history, there's meaning to be found. So drift gently. The masks are off, the drums are quiet, and the gods, at least for now, are sleeping.